I'm going to go ahead and kick us off, and I'm assuming we'll have a few more people that will come in and join us along the way. But hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jonas Kane. I am the Director of Programs at Service-Year Alliance, and we're so excited that you're joining our session focused on the role of local governments in supporting and serving as backbone organizations for impact communities. I'm really excited to be joined by representatives from two of our impact communities in New York City and Philadelphia. Before I jump into our panelist intros, I just want to provide some really quick guidance on how to best utilize our Hop-In platform to maximize participation during this session. So I've also pinned these instructions within the chat, but we're really hoping for this to be an interactive session as much as possible. So please feel free to share comments, experiences, questions throughout our time together. To do so, you can extend the menu on your right-hand side using the arrow at the top right-hand corner of the screen, which will provide you with 2 sessions to engage. The session chat is for all of you to communicate with one another within the session. So if you have comments or looking to add anything to the conversation, all of that you can add within the session chat box. If you have any specific questions along the way, you can leave those in the Q&A box. This will also allow us to monitor questions and make sure that we're taking moments to pause and add those into the conversation along the way. Now that we've gotten those instructions through, I'm thrilled to be joined by members from 2 of our impact communities, Christy Venable from New York City and Amanda Gamble and Giroli Lorenzo from Philadelphia. And I just want to give a few moments for each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Christy, do you want to kick us off from New York?
Sure. Thanks, Jonas. Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Venable. I'm the NYC National Service Support Director at NYCService, which is a division of the Office of the Mayor here in New York City. I've been in this position and with NYCService for almost 6 years. Previous experience, though, includes I guess actually I really got my professional start working at the Washington, D.C. State Service Commission, served D.C., and then spent 6.5 years with America's Service Commissions. So it's nice to see Amber and I think some other representatives from State Service Commissions in this session. Since I've been in New York City, I've worked with a national AmeriCorps program called Up to Us Sports. And prior to joining NYCService, I worked at Bloomberg Philanthropies with Cities of Service. Look forward to sharing more about our impact community today.
Thanks, Christy. Excited to dive more into all of that. From the city of Philadelphia, we have Amanda Gamble and Giroli Lorenzo. Amanda, do you want to jump in with an introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Jonas. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today. My name is Amanda Gamble. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Chief Service Officer in the city of Philadelphia. I'm a 2-time AmeriCorps alum with City Year Philadelphia and the Serve Philadelphia Vista Corps, which is a program that my office runs. We have multiple AmeriCorps programs in our office and also a National Service Task Force, which we're going to tell you all about today. And that's where our work intersects with Giroli, who is our Service Year Expansion Manager. So I'll pass it over to her.
Hi, everyone. My name is Giroli Lorenzo, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Service Year Expansion Manager in the Mayor's Office of Civic Engagement, Volunteer Service in Philadelphia. So a lot of my role is to support initiatives around service year, expanding service year programs and reducing barriers to service. So I serve as a liaison for our National Service Task Force Coalition, which, as Amanda shared, we're going to talk a lot about during this panel. Brief background about myself. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, moved to Philly about 5 years ago to pursue my macro social work degree, and have always had an interest in post-secondary programs. So sort of diving into national service space was a pretty easy transition for me. So excited to be in this space and share a lot about our work here in Philadelphia.
Great, thank you all. And I think to dive into our conversation, I'm going to start with just a bit of a broader opening to give you a chance to explain just a little bit more about the collaborative model and how that looks in each of your locations. So this time, Amanda or Giroli, do you want to kick us off and tell a little bit about how that looks in Philadelphia?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we mentioned, we convened the National Service Task Force here in Philadelphia. And really what that looks like is it's 3 different programs that make up what we call the National Service Task Force. So that's the steering committee, the alumni board, and the program council. So our program council is made up of about 23 different AmeriCorps programs that exist in Philadelphia. They're all programs that are coming together to share best practices, to talk about what we can do better, what we can do as a coalition. Our alumni board supports that work as well in terms of raising awareness of service, bringing together alumni from different programs, both folks that served in Philadelphia and elsewhere across the country and now are community members of Philadelphia. And then finally, our steering committee really pushes the work that Jolie was talking about in terms of service expansion and reducing barriers to service, and then supporting the other 2 entities as well. So that's really how our impact community is structured in Philadelphia.
Thanks, Amanda. And Christy, do you want to jump in for New York?
Sure. So we call our impact community here in New York City NYC Service Year. And I think similar to Philadelphia, we kind of have 3 different buckets of work or kind of areas of work for NYC Service Year. The first is the NYC Service Year Leadership Council, which is comprised presently of about 30 service year programs that operate in New York City. We then also work very closely with the New York City AmeriCorps Alums Chapter. They are independent of our office, but we are a very close partner of theirs. And then the third is the NYC Service Year Member Council, which for some of you who are parts of affiliated with state service commissions, you may know it better as like the Intercorps Council. But we basically bring together service year members from across the city to form a council to provide services and resources that can benefit service year members overall in New York City.
That's great. And I appreciate in both of your answers, you talked about the really deliberate structures that you've set up over the years to approach the work that you're doing together collaboratively. If we pull back and you think back to the origins of how your collaborative came to be and the ways that you thought some of that out, how would you describe the origin story for your local impact community? For whoever wants to jump in first.
Go ahead, Christy.
Okay. For us, our kind of community formed in early 2016. Shortly after I started at NYCService in the fall of 2015, I came on board initially to help run one of our AmeriCorps programs. At NYCService, we directly administer at present 3 AmeriCorps programs. And what we observed from operating those AmeriCorps programs across the city was that there are so many service year programs in New York, but they were really operating in silos. Weren't communicating with each other, weren't collaborating with each other, and really saw that presence, especially like in school settings, because one of our AmeriCorps programs was based in schools. And we would go to a school and see people walking around with city year jackets, and we would see a Reading Partners banner in a hallway, and maybe 2 other AmeriCorps programs present. But we didn't know each other were really there, and we weren't connecting. And we just felt it was a real missed opportunity to connect and learn more about each other and also collaborate. So we kind of leveraged our platform of being part of the mayor's office to bring together the service year community here in New York for a convening. And we did that first through a lot of research. We went to AmeriCorps and asked, for their grantee list. We worked with our state service commission here in New York to try to get a list. And then we also just did some internet research to try to figure out who all was in New York City. And so we held an event called Leap into Service because it was on Leap Day in 2016. We had Bill Basil, who was then the director of AmeriCorps State and National in attendance, as well as Shirley Sagawa, the former CEO of Service Year Alliance, come. And we had representatives from about 40 service year programs here in New York. We spent a good morning together, one just learning about each other, and then talking about common challenges we experience administering service year programming in New York City, and then starting to think through collaborative solutions to those challenges. And so, what came out of that meeting was the formation of what we call the NYC Service Year Leadership Council. And, almost 6 years later, we still meet for the most part on a quarterly basis, where we set, priorities, for at least the quarter, if not, the year, revisit challenges we're experiencing, thinking about solutions. And I will say, from this council, we've been able to collaborate to host a citywide conference and career fair for service year members and alumni that occurs every June. We've also put together a resource guide that I know has been replicated now by other cities on how to navigate living in New York City on a service year stipend, and also pull together some other resources. So excited to see where we continue to grow. We're starting to do more around AmeriCorps alums engagement, but I think we've really found a way to support service year programs, service year alums, and service year members.
Thanks, Christy. And I can say just this week, I know I fielded a question from a program elsewhere in the country that was asking about resources we had for members thinking through tips for living on a stipend. Being able to point them towards exactly that type of thing is immensely beneficial. Thanks for outlining how that structure, how that background looks on your end. Amanda and Giroli?
Yeah, our origin story is very similar to what Christy laid out. I think a lot of times with these programs, we're doing very, very similar work, but we're working in silos and not necessarily connected. We started connecting with other programs in 2015, so around the same time. Our origin story was based off of really coming together around the Mayor's Day of Service Recognition or the National Day of Recognition for National Service, that is very present in Philadelphia. We celebrate it every year, and really wanted that event to be something that was shared across corps. And so coming together for an event like that really required a lot of coordination between different programs. And once we started coming together for that event coordination, we realized, there's so much more here. People who are doing a year of service, whether it's with one program or the next, are really having similar issues and similar experiences, and program staff experience those things as well. So we really wanted to connect because we thought that collaborative space would be really helpful. And so we were running the program council for many years, had a number of programs participating in that, around 23, as I mentioned, in Philadelphia. And actually, it was Service Year Alliance that came to us and said, what you're doing is what we want impact communities to do in other spaces, and how can we support you in that work? And so that was really helpful for us to sort of say, yeah, what we are doing is great and could be replicated in other spaces. And that was sort of when we started thinking bigger picture, because I think one of the things that was happening for us was that we were really thinking about supporting our current corps, how we could do that well, how we could have coordinated events, how we could, support our corps members in Philadelphia regardless of program. But we were really pushed to think, what could it look like if we were an impact community, and thinking about expanding service and thinking about those harder questions about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we really make programs accessible. And so that's sort of the journey that we've been on over the past few years. And that's where Giroli came to join us and really push us further in thinking about those spaces, which we're really doubling down on. And I think part of what we do with our steering committee that's really helpful is that we've broken away from that echo chamber of just having people who know about national service and know that it's great working in this space, but really opening it up to people who maybe don't know about national service and having cross-sector leaders participate in that space so that we're getting different perspectives, and even getting that perspective from folks who may not be already bought into the idea that we all believe that service years are the answer to everything and they are amazing, but really getting that perspective from a different from different sectors so that we can move those objectives further.
Thanks, Amanda. And I think you're getting into a number of interesting things there from your background to over the years, how you started to think through actually operationalizing what it looks like to work together, what setting goals collectively look like together. I'm curious, if we think through the first part of logistics on that, and operationalizing how you're advancing work, what in each of your cities does it look like for who's actually leading the day-to-day work of your impact community? What types of roles and responsibilities are included with that? And also, just as a collaborative, how you figured out staff time, logistically, how to pay for that, some of the nuts and bolts to really bring that to reality.
I can start us off for Philly. So for our program council, we have 2 co-chairs. So right now it's myself serving as a co-chair, and then we usually have somebody from one of the other programs be somebody who would be a co-chair and participate. That way we're collaborating, not just our office as a local government running that space. And then we have the steering committee, which also has 2 co-chairs, Amanda serving as a co-chair, and then Maureen Eccleston, who's the executive director of PennServe, which is our state commission. And then I support as a service year expansion manager in those 2 spaces, making sure we have our calendar invites, we are following up on our meeting notes, and making sure the work is being pushed forward, and that everybody knows what their role is in whatever work we're doing. Making sure folks know when we're meeting next, or if we have any side meetings outside of those monthly meetings. So just making sure that our work is continuing to push forward and everybody knows what's happening in those 2 spaces. And then for our alumni chapter, we just created a process where we now have 14 board members supporting that work, and I support as an advisor for that space. So in terms of who is doing what, I sort of have a foot in each of those 3 spaces to making sure everybody is aligned on what our goal is, what are the strategies that we are implementing to expand national service and promote service years here in Philadelphia, and just making sure that we are able to collaborate one another, communicate one another, and that we all feel like we can sort of have a place, a voice in each of those spaces, regardless if, we're a part of a specific program or know AmeriCorps too well, but that it really is a collaborative effort in those strategic goals of expanding national service and reducing barriers to service in Philly.
For New York City, NYCService is, the backbone support for NYC Service Year and really the staffing support. My role is about 75% dedicated to the NYC Service Year work. I also have a coordinator who is 100% devoted to NYC Service Year. We presently don't have co-chairs of our leadership council like Philadelphia does. I would love to see that happen. And with the AmeriCorps Alums chapter, there are chapter leaders, and again, we just work in close partnership with them. A lot of times we've helped procure space for them for events, just helped, to spread the word about events, through our networks. And then with the Service Year Member Council, the coordinator kind of serves as the advisor. In terms of how it's funded, both my position and the coordinator's position are funded with city dollars.
Thank you both for the background, because I think it's really important to look at how some of the things are actually coming to fruition. Because I think there can be a lot of talk about what collaboration looks like at a high level. And I think it's always one of those things that everyone says is great to do. We know we should be doing it. But when you really have to get into the how are we operationalizing it, how are we setting goals, and what that looks like, there is a lot of really important work that has to go in to making that a reality. So in transitioning to our next question, one of the things I'd be curious to hear more on, and I think we've talked a little bit at a high level about some of the shared goals that have come together, from building awareness of service years, figuring out strategies for reducing barriers and making programs more accessible. When it comes through actually setting some of those shared goals, prioritizing what you're working on at any given time, what does that look like from a process perspective of figuring out which major pieces you're working on and how you're setting priority with different goals as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I definitely want to share in this space, as we've actually had conversations with other impact communities or other spaces that were trying to set up structures like this that were, supported by programs. I think one of the biggest things is that you have to really think in that big picture space. I think it's so easy, and NYCService and our office both run our own AmeriCorps programs too. It's so easy to get stuck in, what your program needs and thinking about that. And I think the unique space of this governmental backbone is that we can sort of have a different perspective sometimes and don't get stuck in what our specific programs need, although it can be hard. And I feel like oftentimes I have to think about, wearing my hat of running my programs and wearing my hat of being in this, collaborative convening space. I think that it's a really delicate balance between bringing people to the table and having that really collaborative, goal setting experience, and then also having people who at the end of the day are those co-chairs that can push the work forward. I think when we were first bringing this space together and we were trying to set goals and really decide what we were going to work on, we got a little lost in that really, really collaborative space. And there needed to be people who could make decisions to say, okay, we've heard everything come to the table, and these are the things that we're going to focus on. Because I think sometimes when you really deep in collaboration, you can get stuck in that space and be going over things over and over again. So it was really important for us to have those co-chairs in space who can make those final decisions to say, all right, we've heard everything from the group, and here's what we're going to do. Because at the end of the day, everybody who's coming into these spaces also has their full-time work that they're focusing on. And so everything that we're doing feels like it's extra work on top. And if you can have people that are committed to that, like Christy was talking about, and like we've tried to establish with Jolie's position, it really, really is a value add because, again, we're all so overloaded with the work that is at hand. And we all know from running national service programs that, that is something that we all deal with, right? The emergency things that have to happen day to day, and then also that big long-term planning. So we really have set larger visions in terms of really making service years accessible and also expanding the number of them in Philadelphia. And so everything needs to tie back to that. And then we have those folks who can make those decisions to say, this is what we're specifically going to focus on, because I think it can feel really overwhelming. There's so many things that you can do in this space, and really being specific about the priorities that we have for this moment in time this year, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think related to what Amanda shared, I think we, as a community here in New York City, realized pretty early on in our formation that in order for us to achieve the vision we had for a service year community or an impact community, that we really did need some dedicating staffing to make it happen. Because like Amanda said, this is a collaborative of like 30 plus service year programs that, all are concerned with their own programming, fundraising needs, what have you. And so to ask a lot of them beyond coming together for quarterly meetings, helping to inform decisions or programming, that may not be very realistic. So that was really why NYCService and the mayor's office made the decision to really make a commitment towards this by dedicating basically 2 staff to this work. And so, in terms of prioritizing and decisions, for the most part, any work we do on behalf of this community or on behalf of that leadership council is informed by the stakeholders. In terms of like the programming side, we have our quarterly meetings with our leadership council members and talk through things with them. And then, yes, kind of like in Philadelphia, it may at some point just come down to NYCService making the final decision based on the feedback. With the alums chapter, it's kind of a slightly different process in that we help to inform, the direction we think that, they should go based on what we see as city needs or priorities or assets, and work with them. So, yeah.
Thank you both for those answers, because obviously there's so much that goes into figuring out what that looks like from a planning perspective. And building off of the answers you just gave, I'm going to shift into the question I saw from Allie in the Q&A, which I think is a really interesting one, because we were talking a little bit about all of the systems, things that you're building up to figure out logistically what it looks like to plan, operationalize, put things into practice. Obviously, if there's one thing we all learned over the past year, it's that all the planning in the world can be impacted in the blink of an eye by things that are outside of our control. So we saw a major impact in so many different ways from COVID-19 over the past year. The question's also speaking to when budget issues maybe come up, and there's all hands on deck happening in other ways. What are some of the ways that you've managed to keep, if we're thinking about this in particular, over the past year, service at the forefront of response initiatives or being seen as a vital part of the local infrastructure, when we know there's the awareness gap that's there for it and all of the different ways that we're working to try to make sure that it is maintained as that type of thing, for anyone who wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. So I think the main answer is to make national service the answer to those things. That's really how we've tried to focus our work over the past, many years. Even as far back as about 3 years ago, our mayor declared a state of emergency because of our opioid crisis. And we were at the table to say, let's put vistas behind this work. We were able to leverage 5 vistas to work on opioid response right then and there. And that happens because of those partnerships and the dynamic that we have set up in our city. We have very close relationship to our regional office. As you can tell, we have a close relationship to our State Service Commission, with Maureen, the executive director there, sitting on our steering committee as a co-chair. And so when things come up, whether it's reallocating members or saying, let's develop a new core to respond to this, we're really able to do that. And I think that's what keeps it at the forefront of people's minds. It helps in other ways, in addition to, setting up new initiatives, because we can really say, we need the city year funding to be maintained because we're seeing learning loss because of COVID in our students. So we really need to make sure that we're still investing in that. And I think that is the additional advantage of having people who are advocates of national service in the mayor's office, and really at those tables for those discussions. So during COVID, we helped one of our partner organizations set up a COVID response corps with support from the State Service Commission. We're setting up a community resource corps to connect residents to resources in, the after effects of COVID, with so many people disenfranchised from the events that took place. And so really thinking about, how can we continue to use national service as an answer to the local issues that we're having, always being there. And even with our current cores, in the first few days of the pandemic, I was brought into the emergency response space, and we were able to redeploy members to feed students with their school lunches so that we didn't miss a day of students receiving school lunches. So it's really thinking about how are we positioning our space and our current programs and potential new programs to be the answer in those spaces.
just like Philadelphia, I think here in New York City, we've also been very mindful of opportunities or issues where we could show national service to be a solution to address some sort of city challenge, COVID being a prime example. Last spring and summer when New York City was really at its peak of COVID, we were able to redeploy AmeriCorps members to help with COVID response. We also were able to engage the AmeriCorps alumni community in various activities related to COVID response. And then in partnership with our AmeriCorps regional office, we were able to bring on a cohort of 40 Vista Summer Associates over last summer, and we have them again this summer to help with COVID response and recovery needs. We also, like Philadelphia, have a core of AmeriCorps members focused on the opioid crisis here in the city. So those are just kind of two examples of where we've really tried to say, national service can be a support, to City Hall and city agencies. Additionally, I think we are really exploring more and more and trying to better position national service as being a real successful workforce development strategy. A lot of the core members that come through the three programs we administer, as well as all the other programs here in the city, are either, early in their careers or maybe are wanting to transition. And so we see these service year programs as an opportunity to develop skills and experience and even, a network that can help with, next steps towards employment. And to that end, we're actually hopefully very soon going to engage in kind of a planning process of how we can better establish a service year to employment pipeline here in New York City, where certain service year assignments could almost be an apprenticeship for specific workforce needs the city has, and hoping to partner even with maybe some local universities to provide some sort of like college credit or credentialing for maybe certain service year assignments to help with like post-secondary education, or either just something to put on your resume going forward.
Thank you both for those answers. And I really think that hits the nail on the head for key ways of keeping service years in the conversation. I think it was remarkable over the past year seeing in Philadelphia, New York City, and other places across the country, the way that service years were used both in the immediate response to COVID-19 and the ways that as the pandemic was prolonged and went on for much longer than a lot of us initially thought it would be, the program models also started cropping up both from new programs and building off of existing programs to really think about how the infrastructure of AmeriCorps and service years could really be utilized as an ongoing piece of that solution in a number of different ways. And then Christy, I think that last piece you're getting into of how we're looking at service years, both as a response to challenges within the community, but also as that pipeline into next steps for members is a key place of how we're looking at positioning service years as an essential local pipeline that's really helping individuals gain skills and go on to become more productive citizens in local communities as well. And as we stay on the path of members transitioning to alums, I want to touch on the question that Amber dropped in our chat as well. I think in both of your cities, you've talked about utilizing alumni boards, having advisory roles, and keeping people engaged after they've finished their service years. Are there major learnings, thoughts, shifts that either of your cities would highlight based on the work that you've done over the years in engaging alumni in your ongoing efforts?
Yeah,
I can start this one. Oh, sorry, Joroli, do you want to go? Or
sure, I'll go. So since I first started my role here with Philadelphia, one of the big projects we had was to reconvene the alumni chapter, and sort of like my favorite project that I've worked on the past 2 years, because I've gotten to work with a lot of different folks, truly champions of service, and alumni that really care about our service year programs and making sure that those coming out of their service year are ready for the workforce, no matter what industry they decide to go to. So we have board members that are in the corporate space, in the higher ed space, in the education space, in the consulting space, you name it. And they really care about preparing alumni and making sure that they can go into whatever path they choose. So I think in thinking about like our efforts in promoting service years and some of the strategies that we want to implement, I think for me it's really important to make sure that they do have a voice in those spaces, because they know the experience, they went through it, they know what comes next, and they know what the needs are, right? Because they have experienced that. So I think we're transitioning to a model where we're going to have alumni serve or come to our steering committee meetings and our program council meetings, and I think that's super important. And it's exciting that we're moving to that model. But I think with our alumni board, they just have so much insight in what professional development looks like. That's a little different than what most AmeriCorps programs already are doing in professional development, because they're already out there, you know, in their careers, and they know how to talk about their AmeriCorps service. They know how to go to interviews and really talk, you know, the different skills up that they gain, and they're very creative in the way that they do that. And I really hope that we can use those skills and build out more opportunities for service year members to tap into those values and like those just like that skills that they're able to bring forward to the table. Our alumni board, they want to build like a professional development boot camp, which I'm super excited about for them to do, because I think it's going to be a lot different than what is already being offered in our AmeriCorps programs, and hopefully have them be mentors as well. So I think there's just like a huge value add, and making sure their voices at the table is super important. Because I mean, nobody else can really talk about AmeriCorps programs the way that they can, because they experienced it themselves. So why not tap into that, you know, that energy and passion as well.
And if I could just add, I think, you know, the sweet spot is really everybody listening to each other. So as Jolie was mentioning, you know, making sure we have 3 different groups, like how do we make sure that everybody is hearing the needs from those different groups? So it's not just listening to, you know, here's what the alumni want to do, but are the alumni plugging in their resources to what the needs of the current programs are as well? That's where the sweet spot comes in. And I think also we have an extremely diverse board, and I think that's really special as well, because I think what we believe and what we want to encourage and what we want to show to the world and to the rest of Philadelphia is that, you know, there isn't one specific demographic of person that does a service year. And so having a really diverse alumni board is really important in terms of age and experience and, you know, ethnic background and diversity in all of the ways, because then the current members can see themselves in the alumni board and join that chapter post their term of service. So pass it over to Christy.
Yeah, I think we first started to connect with the New York City AmeriCorps Alums chapter probably 3 years ago. And at that time, the chapter had been fairly dormant for a while. And again, we saw just a real missed opportunity, because we know there are thousands of AmeriCorps alumni in New York City. And just from our own experience running AmeriCorps programs, we knew that there were alums that wanted to be able to stay connected and feel, you know, part of this AmeriCorps service year community beyond their service. So what we realized though too in the early days of working with the chapter is, and I can't say this is the case across the board for an alums chapter, but at least here in New York City, we realized the importance of providing some sort of backbone support to the chapter. You know, most of the individuals who are leaders of the chapter, you know, are full-time professionals. They were just doing this on the side and, you know, weren't able to devote the time to programming, cultivating members that, you know, someone who had this as part of their job description could. So that's how we initially started working with the chapter, was kind of engaging in a strategic planning process with the leaders in terms of what they are seeking from an alums chapter. And, what really emerged was, and I think this is probably common across the country, is, service, networking, professional development, and then, opportunities to connect with current members. And so as, the leader of the service year community, we've tried to build that out over the past 3 years in partnership with other AmeriCorps programs here in the city, with current members to do speed mentoring events between alums and members, hosting professional development sessions for alums. And for us as city government, in particular around civic engagement, educating alums on how they can get involved in community boards here in New York, or help with, like in 2020 with the census, things we can't necessarily get members to engage in, but that, we can encourage alums to continue down that path of civic engagement. So, with COVID and the summer, we've been a little bit quiet, but I think, in the fall, we're going to get back into some programming to engage, this new class of alums that are coming through this summer.
Those were all such great answers in talking about how you take into consideration diverse perspectives or thinking about engaging diverse partners to maximize who you're talking to and what the work actually looks like in that space. As a really quick follow-up question on that, I'm curious, when you think through engaging individuals or organizations whose engagement can be more in the voluntary space, where it's not necessarily someone's day-to-day job to do something, what are some of the systems, tools, ways that you've been able to set up some of that stuff, either to create accountability, shared expectations, or anything else to help drive some of that work towards success?
I think the number one thing that we always think about is what is the value add for the individual or the partner, right? So there has to be something that's bringing them back to that space. And I think also thinking about, how did their individual goals tie into the larger goals of the community? I also think that at the end of the day, you have to have some paid staff, right? I think we can all agree on that. Like, it can't just be fully voluntary, because people are so stretched, and the amount of work that has to happen. And even what Christy was talking about in terms of like having those resources, whether they be budgetary or even just space, is so important, because, folks who are just doing this on a voluntary basis and don't have that connection back to a larger organization are just going to run up against those issues time after time. So having some ways for us to sort of help in those spaces and pave those pathways, I think is really, really important. But I think at the end of the day, it's really having a shared vision, shared goals, and understanding that you're connecting back to those goals and being a value add to whatever the individual goals are.
I echo what Amanda just said about, shared values and goals, and, making it clear, how their participation, benefits both their organization, but also the larger service year community. When we first launched the Service Year Leadership Council, we created a pledge. We asked programs to sign, just saying they would participate in quarterly meetings, blah, blah, blah. I mean, nothing that we could hold them accountable to, but, we thought maybe if you sign something, you'll feel more like accountable to it. And we kind of tapered away from that. But, I think just as time has evolved and we've gotten to know each other better and, really have produced that, people are enticed to, stay connected, for that reason. Additionally, I think, at least in terms of like our alums chapter, having like written position descriptions that lay out clear roles and responsibilities and, the expectations has also helped to, kind of ensure some accountability.
Thank you both for those answers. And as we approach the last part of our session, I just have one final question for you all to weigh in with some thoughts on. And for anyone who might be watching, listening to all of the great insights that you've gave throughout, are there any general thoughts that you would want to leave individuals with who might be looking in their own communities at starting out and building collaborative models? Any like general advice, thoughts that you'd want to give individuals, programs, organizations that might be in the early stages of thinking through that?
Yeah, I think it's important to connect with a broad range of stakeholders as you're developing an impact community. You know, and I think also depending on how you're going to define a service year, if it's, you know, just AmeriCorps focused, or if you are looking at other types of non-AmeriCorps service years, which is what we did here in New York. And then, but, you know, even beyond that, you know, like engaging, you know, college university partners, maybe key funders, you know, in your community. If you're not part of local government, you know, if there's an opportunity to engage local government in some way, I think it's good to get a lot of the key stakeholders in the community involved from the start. I think, you know, if you are local government and are going to kind of take the lead on organizing and staffing an impact community, you know, something that's always in the back of my mind is, you know, the transition of leadership. You know, here in New York City, we formed under our current mayor, whose term will be ending this December. You know, I have full faith that NYCService year will carry on into a new administration. But I think, you know, that's something that, you know, you also have to be strategic about as well, as, you know, how are you going to institutionalize this and ensure its sustainability beyond, you know, administration.
Yes, definitely echoing the transition piece. We were created under our previous mayor, but I was working for the city throughout both of those terms, and that was helpful to have some consistency in terms of carrying things forward, which I think can be really hard in local government. But I do think that that also plays into what Christy said about having a wide variety of different stakeholders. I think something that we are really trying to push into, as I mentioned at the beginning of this panel, is the idea of not just having people who are already bought into service years at the table. So folks in the corporate space and the funding space and you know, the education space, so that we can make sure that we're getting into those spaces. I think access is so important, and I think that having, you know, a platform in the mayor's office can be really, really helpful with that. And also, I think really prioritizing these big picture things and really focusing on them and putting funds behind them, because we've supported other communities who are trying to establish these type of collaboratives when it's an already stretched organization that runs their own program, and that's like the crux of what they do. Even if the individual who's doing it is super passionate, the capacity just isn't there to really carry that forward. So I think having that platform of being somebody who really thinks of these advocacy spaces and, you know, the larger picture is super helpful in making this work. And then having all those different stakeholders at the table.
Thank you for those great closing thoughts. I am getting the nudge that we are now at time. So I just want to thank our panelists again for all of the great insights that they've been able to share from Philadelphia and from New York City. To end our day after this session, I just want to give the announcement, we're going to be moving into a networking session where you'll have the opportunity to chat with others across the country who are thinking about elevating national service in their communities as well. So as you exit this session, you can see already highlighted on the left-hand side of your panel, the networking label. You can click that to enter the networking space, which will set you up to connect one-on-one with different individuals who are attending the conference from across the country. And that can be a great way to take a couple of minutes to connect, share more info about what you're doing, and learn from others who are attending the conference as well. So I hope you're able to take a few minutes over the next half hour to enter that space, and that you've gotten a lot out of this session, the rest of what we've gone through during day one. And with that, I'll close out this session and hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.